Berkshire Football Stories podcast is sponsored by the Curious Academy, a skills hub running a sales academy, digital skills bootcamp and data analytics training in Reading. The Curious Academy is all about you and creating positive outcomes, whether that is finding a career, starting a business or just walking away feeling much more confident about life. Their programs are designed for people who have lost their way a bit and are looking to change their futures, maybe rebuild their confidence or be pushed slightly out of their comfort zone in a safe and friendly environment. Group sizes are small to ensure everyone has an opportunity to get involved. The Curious Academy delivers inspirational and fun programs designed to help people wanting to improve their skills, whatever their background. You can find out more at www.thecuriousacademy.co.uk. Football in Berkshire's podcast is sponsored by Ticket Pass. Ticket Pass provides an ethical alternative to a ticketing industry that often profits from greed. Our platform is an all-in-one solution for creating events, buying and selling tickets, live streaming and keeping events in a safe space. To find out more, to buy tickets, to sign up to the service, head to ticketpass.org. For most people, 2nd of February 2011 was a normal working day. But for supporters of Windsor Eton FC, it was the day our club died. That was one of the final sentences in Michael Gegg's book, Wearing the Red and Green, A Complete History of Windsor Eton Football Club 1892 to 2011. And this is the story of that day. Hello, Tom Canning here, and it is Windsor Month on Football in Berkshire. We're looking at all the things Windsor football from the past, the present and the future. And on this episode of Berkshire Football Stories, we are looking at the surprise, and well, at least to a lot of us on the outside, demise of one of Berkshire's most famous clubs. You'll be familiar with Windsor FC, the Union Jack shirts and of course Mick Woodham. But before this current club was born in 2011, there is quite a bit of history and one particular moment that led to it all. There probably hadn't been an earthquake quite like this one since Wokingham Town's departure from Finchampstead Road. You can listen to one of our first ever podcasts with Mark Ashwell to learn more about that. It was a strange time for the club, who were going well in the Southern League Premier Division after promotion in the summer. They kept hold of leading goalscorer Michael Chennels and made some important additions, with boss Dave Mudge guiding the side to just one defeat in 16 league games. Off the field, however, trouble was brewing, and the HMRC were catching up with the club. Before we speak to Michael Gegg, I wanted to read a couple of extracts from his excellent book, Wearing the Red and Green, to give you an idea of where the club was and what was coming. Success on the field was not matched by events off it. In October, the club were contacted by Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs regarding an unpaid tax bill of approximately £50,000. It was a threat that was very real. After discussions, the High Court gave the club 56 days to sort its finances out. We've got the extension now, which means we can still play, said a relieved Dave Mudge in the Windsor Express. Off-the-field affairs had meant clubs were circling Stag Meadow and making approaches to players. There's been a non-stop stream of people contacting me and my players saying that when we go out of business they will have somewhere to go. Well, this extra 56 days means they are going nowhere. The 56-day extension allowed the club to put plans together to enter a company voluntary agreement, or a CVA. This meant the club, or so it thought anyway, would face a 10-point penalty and a reduction in the club's debt. The club would have to pay creditors a percentage of every pound owed to creditors, subject to agreement from creditors. In January, The Football Association and the Southern League informed the club that entering a CVA and paying off creditors a percentage in the pound would actually lead to far worse than a 10-point deduction. The club would actually face a 2-level relegation from the Premier Division. The club's alternative options were to enter a CVA and agree to pay 100 pence in every pound owed over a 3-year period, or agree to pay off the HMRC in full and informally negotiate a payment plan with other creditors. Things do not look good, reflected Kevin Stott in the Windsor Express. Days later, it was announced that the club's home game against Tiverton Town on the 29th of January would be its last. The club had lost its battle and exhausted all options. Supporters were informed that the club would not be contesting the winding up petition brought against it by the HMRC. Michael says, "I remember when the message was delivered, shock at the realisation that we'd no longer be watching our club after all these years. We slumped to a 3-1 defeat in that final game. Substitute Tom Collins was to be the last player to score for Windsor and Eton Football Club." So, you're up to speed. I will be chatting to Michael after these messages. Football in Berkshire's podcast is sponsored by Ticket Pass. Ticket Pass provides an ethical alternative to a ticketing industry that often profits from greed. Our platform is an all-in-one solution for creating events, buying and selling tickets, live streaming and keeping events in a safe space. To find out more, to buy tickets, to sign up to the service, head to ticketpass.org. Berkshire Football Stories is sponsored by the Curious Academy, a skills hub running a sales academy, digital skills boot camps and data analytics training in Reading. To find out more, head to thecuriousacademy.co.uk. Hello, Michael. How are you?
Yeah, I'm well, thanks, Tom. Thanks for having me on.
That's quite all right. So this podcast is part of our Windsor month, which we are doing in February 2023. I have to get that date right because it's changed recently. I wanted to just sort of start at the end, as it were, and it was 2nd of February 2011, and it's probably the worst day for a supporter of a football club ever.
Well, the issue, actually, Tom, on that day was it's also my birthday. So
oh no,
it was an interesting birthday present back in 2011.
Yes, I can imagine. That's so. This is the demise of Windsor and Eton Football Club, which came to an end in the High Court. And it just, I remember a while back we talked to Mark Ashwell, who was the president of Wokingham Town, or a long-serving supporter or board member of Wokingham Town, and he said at the end of their club it was very much a smash and grab raid on the clubhouse to get as much memorabilia as possible before the bulldozers moved in. It wasn't quite the same here, was it?
No, it wasn't, because I think as soon as the club folded, pretty much straight away people were already putting in plans in place for a new club in Windsor. So things like memorabilia, what they didn't need to be that massive. It didn't need to be that massive rush. But the great thing was that all of the memorabilia that was there, the officials of the new club kind of packed it all into boxes, stored it away. But made sure that nothing was thrown out, which was great.
So, talk me a little bit through about kind of what happened, because just reading the end of your book, it was like there was 5 weeks of a roller coaster before the axe finally fell. I'll tell you what. Let's go right back to the very start. Then you started the season quite well. Dave Mudge was in charge. You'd kept your star striker, and things were looking good.
Yeah, I mean, we probably need to rewind just a little bit further, to be honest. So the season before that, we'd won the Southern Division 1 title under Keith Scott and Jim Melvin. We had a fantastic team, and I'd probably, if I'm honest, in my time watching Windsor, is probably one of the top 2 or 3 sides that we had in my time. It's a very, very special side that Keith had put together there. There was a fallout, disagreement at the end of that season. Don't know the ins and outs of that between Keith and Peter, who was the chairman. And within weeks of that league title win, that side broke up. I think only 4 players remained, 4 or 5 players remained, and Dave Mudge took over. But if I'm honest, at that period, there was definitely a perfect storm was brewing. Actually, very similar to today in a way, that economically the country was going through this big global recession that happened during that period with the big financial crisis. And as a result of that, directors, businesses inevitably would have been affected. We lost a sponsor. And if I'm honest, the budget that we had, I don't know what the exact number was, but it was probably an unsustainable budget in all truth. The crowds that Windsor were getting, we were never a Slough or say what Maidenhead are now, and the crowds that they got. We were probably always one of the lower, I guess, clubs in the league at the Premier Division level, with the number of crowds that we were getting. And you only have to do the maths, and you look at those crowd numbers and you think, really we're relying on contributions from directors. And if we're honest, I'd probably say that that's the same in 99% of non-league clubs. I think a lot of non-league clubs will probably deny that, but I think if you do a lot of the maths and honestly, you look at what your crowd figures are, can you really sustain that just from gate money? So it's always directors' contributions. So, we went through a period where we just probably didn't have the money, in all truth, and everything just started to unravel from there. I mean, I think there were a few myths that were circulating at that time around Keith and Jim in particular, around they overspent their budgets, etc. They didn't overspend their budgets. That was a complete unfair myth that was put on Keith and Jim. I've spoken to a lot of people in developing this book, and that is one thing I do want to try and get that message out there, that Keith and Jim didn't overspend budgets. That's it's unfair on them, and it's unfair on that squad that was put together. Keith, year on year, his budget was reducing. And I don't know the ins and outs of the fallout with Peter, but clearly there was a disagreement between the two parties. And Keith parted ways. But I do know that when the chairman at the time, Peter, had gone to Keith to say, look, we do need to reduce the budget, even though we're going into the Premier Division, he came back with a proposal with a vastly reduced budget. But obviously that wasn't accepted. Yeah. And Keith moved on. And I do think that's important to get out there. But at the time, I say it was a perfect storm. But at that time, no one knew the depth of the real financial issues. We then started that following season. Dave Mudge and Byron Walton took over, and again they did an incredible job building a team up from nothing, only having 4 or 5 players. We were lucky that we managed to keep Michael Chennels, who he was a 30-goal a season centre forward. So if you're going up into a Premier Division, if you can keep hold of your best goal scorer, you're always in with a chance of at least staying up and hoping to compete. So we went up and we done really well that season. We were 5th in the league by the time we went. By the time the club folded, so we done fantastic. But as I say, it was just. HMRC came, approached the club, whatever it was, October, November time, unpaid tax bill, £60,000, and we didn't have the money to pay it back.
And so, when did you first get an inkling of that?
It was October time. I mean, to be fair, the chairman at the time, Peter Simpson, he was very transparent at that time. It was all in the press. I think with the hope that we we could, maybe able to get some investment in. Michael Chennels was put on a transfer list, and I guess there was always the hope that someone might come in for Chens. Earlier in that summer, Brentford had sniffed about and took him on a trial for 5 weeks, and then at the end of that 5 weeks, they didn't go for him. But I think Peter was probably of the hope that, if we can sell Michael Chennels for 25 or 30 grand, actually that's going to go a big way to paying that tax bill. But that never came through, and you can't rely on stuff like that.
So that kind of that 5 weeks before it sort of all ended. Just reading the end of your book, you said, as you say, it was a bit of a roller coaster. 1 week it was good, 1 week it was bad. Did you really ever think that it would end?
Do you know what? It's a really good question. I think if I'm honest, no. I think as human beings, we always kind of probably have that bit more positive outlook of something called, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. They'll come to a repayment agreement with the HMRC. Someone will come in. Peter will find some money from somewhere. Kevin Stott, who's obviously now the owner of Windsor FC, he'd left. He and Peter had been kind of the two main men at Windsor and Eton for obviously many, many years. They had a fallout, which is also part of the perfect storm. But Kevin was then back on the scene then and looking to try and save the club. So I guess there was a lot of people thinking, maybe Kevin will put, with Kevin, there could be some investment. So I think everyone just had that hope and probably thought the worst would never actually happen. And, someone would just come out of the woodwork.
And obviously that never did quite. Did it at some point become easier just to have a new club instead of this old sort of hulking debt monster?
Yeah, I think the options that were open to the club at the time, because we were £50,000-60,000 in debt. The debt was bigger than that officially, £200,000, but really that was made up of directors' loans. So unless Peter and Kevin demanded that money back, which they wouldn't have, that wasn't it's a real debt. That was £50,000-60,000. But the options open to the club at the time were, we'd just been promoted to the Premier Division. The only real option, if no investment came forward, was probably a CVA. So to do the CVA, there was kind of a bit of misunderstanding on what that would involve. Some people originally thought, we're going to get a 10-point deduction, or happily take a 10-point deduction. But in real terms, it was, you would actually be, if you went in the CVA, you would be relegated 2 divisions. So Premier Division down to the combined counties in essence. And you'd still have to pay the debt back. You would agree a figure with your creditors. So for every pound, we'll pay back 20p in the pound, for example, over a 3-year period, and the club would get relegated 2 divisions. So I guess if you reform the club, so if you close that club, reform the club, and this is harsh, particularly for creditors, you would inevitably, you could speak to the Football Association, you could reform the club, you would have to start 2 leagues below, but you wouldn't have the debt. So from that perspective, it made sense to close the club, reform, and then you're starting off. Either way, you would have had to have started in the combined counties, but one would be with a debt, one would not be with a debt. So that was obviously the final decision, which made a lot of sense at the time. Now, fast forward to where Windsor Football Club are now, and this is easier said than done, but the big issue that Windsor Football Club have right now is they don't have a lease on Stag Meadow, and there's been ongoing disputes with the Crown. I won't bore you with all that, but there's been the Crown trying to get a lease in place. Now, if you would have taken the CVA route, yes, you would have obviously then had to have paid the debt, a portion of the debt back. You would have been relegated 2 divisions, but you would have still have had a 25-year lease or whatever the term was on Stag Meadow. And probably now Windsor FC has probably lost more than what that debt would have been, because we haven't had a lease now. The club could have had all the investment, they could have done 3G pitches, everything that I think Kevin had aspirations to do, if you've got the lease. And one way of keeping that, maintaining that lease, would have been the CVA route, because the Windsor and Eton, that company, is still in existence.
Yeah.
But I guess the unknown at the time, I think, as well, was Kevin, etc., weren't sure if there might have been other debts that may have come out of the closet.
Yeah. I suppose it was a really strange time to sort of be around, because that sort of thing just hadn't happened, especially not locally. There was probably no one to turn to for any advice.
Totally, and I think that as well, that's why a lot of us, we didn't think it would probably ever come to it, because we'd been in financial issues before, but you'd always come through it. And you look at other clubs that have gone through, like Slough went through different challenges that they've been through as a club. They come through it, and you just look at different clubs when you hear financial difficulties, and clubs always come through it. So I don't think any of us really thought we're gonna close.
Is there? It may seem a little harsh, but in the end, a club did close. Is there blame? Is there things that people could have done better? How does a tax bill get racked up like that?
It's a really good question, and I think absolutely right. I think a number of people could have done better. You obviously had, as I say, it's a perfect storm. We lost sponsorship. We lost directors. Directors didn't necessarily have the disposable spend. And I don't know this, but sometimes you do get this a lot in non-league football. You agree your budget, and you sometimes think we can afford that budget, because if we could just get a run in the FA Cup, we'll get some prize money. If we can just get that FA Cup prize money, we'll be fine. And then inevitably you then get knocked out in the preliminary round and you get upset. So I think if I was to say anything, I would say we probably should have made budget cuts earlier, but I guess it's a very difficult thing to do when you're top of the league. You've got a brilliant football team. You're, that season, that 09-10 season, we were on the verge of doing an Invincibles. We didn't lose our first game until mid-March. It would take a strong man to suddenly, during that period, say, do you know what? I'm pulling all the budget. Very, very difficult. Very, very difficult. But I think, ultimately, probably, I think a number of people probably need to take a little bit of accountability, absolutely. But it's hindsight.
Oh, absolutely. What did you do afterwards? What was the first thing you did once it had all been confirmed that there was no more team?
Well, I might not be the best. I wasn't necessarily involved, but I know that straight away, probably within about a week after that February 2nd wind up in the High Court, meetings were occurring, meetings with the FA. What were our options? Very quickly, there was a real plan that we would be looking to start a club for the following season. There was meetings with the Hellenic League, there was meetings with the Combined Counties League, etc. We quickly got accepted, that probably because of the stature of what Windsor and Eton was and the crowds that we were getting, we were placed in Combined Counties Premier Division, which I think at the time there may have been a couple of upset clubs in that.
Yes, I think there were. Yes, if
I remember thinking back, but then there were also a number that actually appreciated that we brought a good number of fans to away games, and that they were making decent money over the bar. So, but I do remember there was a couple of people from clubs that thought we shouldn't have been put straight into the Premier Division.
I suppose what kind of do you feel like are the early warning signs then, just for other clubs? What are the warning signs that there might be a problem down the road? Because obviously this is bound to happen again at some point.
Yeah, it's just looking at your bank account, right? It's being financially prudent, and making sure and having the balls to make difficult decisions at the right time. For me, I say it's pretty straightforward, but you should know at the start of the season, you should be very confident knowing what you genuinely generate as a club revenue wise, and set a budget accordingly that you can afford. I just think that too many clubs at non-league level survive on benefactors. And all it needs is that one person to go. If you're not, you just need to be sustainable. And I think clubs that have done it well, to be fair, I looked at some numbers the other week. I saw Ascot, revealed, I think their revenue turnover, I don't know what the profit is, but their turnover has gone from 300k to 600k, in the last couple of years, because they've invested in the 3G pitch. And it feels like, I think Ascot have become a very, very good model of how to run a sustainable football club. And I think there's a lot of lessons there for a lot of other local clubs.
Michael, just to finish off, I mean, obviously, it almost feels like slightly a unique situation in that you were top of the league and you went bust. I suppose if there's a crumb of comfort, it's that you went out on a high.
Yeah, absolutely. It was, but it was just difficult, right? Because you're being so successful. I don't know. Maybe the emotions could have been better if we were rock bottom. But when the thing for me is that squad that Keith had, that was a very special squad, and you have the what if question. How far could that side have gone? Because we had all of those players were at the peak of their careers. Your Michael Chennels, your Jake Parsons, your Ryan Parsons, Andrew Fagan, blah, blah, blah. How far that squad could have gone. And I think we would have that squad would easily have held its own in the Conference South. But you never know. But I think that was a special squad. When I look at how the likes of Slough are doing now, etc., that side was special. So it's just very, very, very sad that they couldn't have gone on as a squad to see, fulfill their potentials.
Michael, thank you very much for your time. Did you want to just plug your book and podcast?
Well, so the book. One of my big passions, obviously, is Windsor Eton, and when the club did go under, one of the things that I just didn't want to happen was that history to be forgotten. Windsor Eton had a very, very special history through big FA Cup runs. In the 80s, games against Red Star Belgrade, Ajax, Arsenal, in friendlies. Obviously, numerous league titles, cup wins. Then obviously the low points of numerous relegations in there as well. But there was a massive, really interesting history, of course, with the royal family, with the royal family as well. So just never wanted that to go to waste and those memories to be lost. So got down and just started writing and researching, and released the book last year, which has gone down really, really well. We've had a few unions since, getting lots of the old players from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s all back together, which has been great. Launched a podcast series. So I know all the challenges that you must go through when trying to do a podcast. It's great. We're just again interviewing former players. But what I should say, do check it out. Wearing the Red and Green, which is the name of the book and also the name of the podcast. But I think the last thing I'll just plug is all the profits from the book are donated to Alexander Devine Children's Hospice, which is an extremely important local charity. So, making zero money on this book, all profits and everything, and all the money we're making at all the reunions, etc., are all going to that charity.
Michael, thank you very much.
No problem at all.
A huge thank you there to Michael Gegg for taking the time to talk to me for Windsor Month. You can find out more about our project on footballinberkshire.co.uk or search #WindsorMonth on social media. Michael's book, Wearing the Red and Green, is available on Amazon and it comes thoroughly recommended by us. Thanks everybody, we'll see you for another podcast very soon. This episode of Berkshire Football Stories was hosted by Tom Canning and featured Michael Gigg. It was produced by Tom Canning. Our theme music is called Space Camp and it is from the album Everyday Adventures by Reading ukulele band Rocket Kings, who you can find on Spotify and all good music outlets. Find Football in Berkshire on Twitter, Facebook at www.footballinberkshire.co.uk. Football in Berkshire's podcast is sponsored by Ticket Pass. Ticket Pass provides an ethical alternative to a ticketing industry that often profits from greed. Our platform is an all-in-one solution for creating events, buying and selling tickets, live streaming and keeping events in a safe space. To find out more, to buy tickets, to sign up to the service, head to ticketpass.org. Berkshire Football Stories is sponsored by The Curious Academy, Skills Hub running the Sales Academy, Digital Skills Boot Camps and Data Analytics training in Reading. To find out more, head to thecuriousacademy.co.uk.